cannot be afraid to talk about some of the difficult issues that are facing our country. And I think that if anything we learned from the last couple of years is that it was our fear to stand up to the left-wing cancel culture COVID mob that has allowed this remarkable catastrophe to go on for almost 2 years. You know, I said a couple of days ago, we allowed government and public health and our school system to convince our children that if they play next to one another in close proximity, that someone, God forbid, may die. We're raising a generation of children that have suffered a mental trauma, who will have difficulty potentially leading a normal life. And we should not be afraid to confront those that seek to further, potentially, whether it's purposefully or not, to inflict harm on our country, on Canadians, and on our economic interests. And we should not be afraid to address the discussion around the environment and climate change, but take it head on. Canada produces only 1.5% of all global emissions. It's even if we were to cut all of them, it's not clear that it would actually make any material difference in the climate. We know that most nations are now giving up on the Paris Accord. We know who the polluters are. I think it's a pie in the sky that is not attainable and not necessary, which is why I'll take Canada out of the Paris Accord. And we're blessed with so much forest, as you say, that most, if not all, of our greenhouse gases are actually naturally absorbed. That is why I oppose the carbon tax. I do not believe that taxing Sally $10 at the gas pump is actually going to affect the global climate. I don't think that anyone really believes that anymore. And I will not impose a regressive tax on Canadians, which achieves nothing other than effectively punishing Canadians and making life more expensive. So, right now we're planting 360 million trees a year. I will look to increase it to maybe 500 million, but I think that Canada's natural resources are a blessing. It's one of the themes of my commitment to Canada is to make Canada a natural resources superpower. And that means repealing the anti-pipeline bill, rethinking, legislating, and negotiating the three main pipelines, and revisiting the discussion on Excel. Americans are very unhappy with the price of gas. We clarify the duty to consult, encourage the creation of refinery capacity, and reconsider our approach to mining and invest and encourage mining. I think the only way we get out of the fiscal hole that we're in right now is to unleash our economic superpower, and we can do that through Canada's natural resources.
Yeah, I see in your policy document, you are making sure that you don't leave Canada's Indigenous communities behind, particularly in those partnerships with the resource industry. I think most Albertans know that if you were to pick a resource, any industry in this country that you would describe as Indigenous, it would be the resource industry. I think Indigenous people are double represented in mining and resource extraction projects as a percentage of the workforce versus a percentage of the Canadian population. You've rightly pointed that out in here. The one last thing I want to talk to you about, because I could probably talk to you all day, but I'm sure you have other things to do. Healthcare. It's an evergreen problem that you just pick up the paper, you go on the internet, and you see the healthcare system is in collapse. And it's not a COVID thing. This is a perennial problem in Canada. So how do we fix that? And is there room in your plan for private innovation to alleviate the load that the publicly funded system is bearing?
Sheila, if I may, very quickly on Indigenous policy, as I travel the country, I realize how prevalent and still important and raw this issue to so many Canadians, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And I think that that is certainly something that the Canadian government, that our future Conservative government should be thinking about. We must be mindful of our history so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, but we should not be encouraging or succumbing to Justin Trudeau's divisive rhetoric. So I think that the best thing we can do for reconciliation is actually improve the lives of Indigenous people. And we can get a good start with water. We still have hundreds of communities around Canada that still don't have access to clean and safe drinking water. And given today's technologies, where we can essentially drop water anywhere and make water out of air, that is inexcusable, which is why I'm committed to making sure that every Canadian community has water by the end of my first term. But back to your question on healthcare, we have to acknowledge, we have to concede that Canada has one of the most efficient healthcare systems in the world, and one of the lowest rates of hospital beds in the OECD. My region of North York has one of the lowest bed numbers in the countries, and therefore in the developed world. That's unacceptable. So we have to own up to the fact that we're probably overdue for a major capital expansion as our population is getting older and people are living longer. We need more beds, but it cannot come without administrative improvements. For instance, in the province of Ontario, we have more healthcare bureaucrats than family physicians. I read in the Post media last year that Canada has about 10 times more healthcare bureaucrats than Germany per capita. So that's impossible. So we need to work with the provinces to reduce our administrative burden if we're going to look at a capital injection. And second of all, I am in favor of looking at a private delivery model still within the framework of the Canada Health Act. We should encourage doctors and surgeons to innovate and see patients outside of the hospital or existing frameworks. We should encourage private imaging and diagnostics. And at the same time, we can still remain within the single healthcare payer system where a private supplier would bill government directly. And finally, on healthcare, I'm going to amend the Canada Health Act to make sure that we will not discriminate against any Canadian because of their medical status or their personal healthcare choice.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday, I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.